July 1st, 2025. At precisely 02:14 UTC, a faint dot appeared on the sky tracking feed from the Atlas survey in Hawaii. To most, it was nothing more than another blip in the sea of cosmic noise, another background rock, another frozen traveler in the endless cold. But within 72 hours, something emerged that shattered the silence of the celestial routine. The object was not just moving, it was accelerating, and not in the way comets do. If you're hearing this for the first time, take a second, because after this point, after you learn what was hidden in plain sight, it might not be so easy to forget. And before we go deeper, if this kind of cosmic anomaly matters to you, stay with me. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about a rock in space. It's the story they didn't tell us. It's the timeline of a silence that grew louder than any radio signal ever sent. They named it 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever recorded by humans, not from here, not orbiting our sun, sent or drifting through the emptiness between stars. By the morning of July 3rd, news outlets ran one-liners: new comet from outside the solar system, stranger than Oumuamua, likely harmless. But the anomaly didn't wait. Under the standard model, comets react to sunlight. Their surfaces vaporize, jets of ice and dust escape, changing speed by tiny amounts. But 3I Atlas moved in a way that didn't match its coma, didn't match its tail, didn't match anything seen before in cometary behavior. Acceleration: 0.020 millimeters per second squared, too big to ignore, too smooth to be random. Vector: not pointing away from the sun, but angled slightly off, like something correcting itself. That's the moment a question split the amateur astronomy forums in two. Did 3I Atlas accelerate itself? No one expected the amateurs to notice first, yet they did. On July 4th, a user in Perth posted a photo from his personal telescope, not just clearer than the public images, but revealing something new: a thin, faint line where no tail should have been, a jet pointing in the wrong direction. Within 6 hours, the post was deleted, his account suspended. The cached version lived a little longer, just long enough for 1,200 people to download the image. By July 5th, NASA updated its official page. One number changed. The comet's non-gravitational acceleration was removed. A footnote replaced it: data under review. Under review, a phrase anyone in the scientific community knows too well. It means not yet verified. It can also mean not for public discussion. And so began the silence. You have to ask, was it an error, a glitch, overzealous amateur speculation, or was someone already pulling the shutters shut? Let's look at the data again. July 1st, the object is cataloged. July 3rd, anomaly detected. July 4th, amateur photo gives first hint of directional thrust, not from gas release, but from a stable, narrow emission. July 5th, official data altered, 5 days. That's how long the truth lasted in the open, and yet nobody asked, why does an interstellar object need to accelerate at all? Let's pause here. Before you wander off into the logical safety net of just a rock, let me ask again. Why does something that has traveled trillions of miles suddenly change speed right after entering human observation? It's like walking into a room full of strangers, and the moment someone notices you, you start moving differently. The thing is, outer space isn't supposed to care about us. It doesn't look back. It doesn't acknowledge your presence, unless it's not just space, unless it's not just a rock. Before we go any further, I want to be clear. This isn't where we leap into certainty. This is where we hold the question in our hands and turn it toward the light. Examine every angle, every shadow. Because if an interstellar object was seen accelerating toward our part of the solar system, then every assumption we've made about cosmic drift, random motion, and celestial indifference suddenly gets rewritten. And here's the truth. The most unsettling part of it wasn't the acceleration. It was the timing. Because 3I Atlas wasn't just moving. It was heading for a perfect alignment. On December 19, 2025, exactly 171 days after its first detection, 3I Atlas will cross Earth's orbital plane, not crash, not collide, just pass, like a blade run past skin, a warning or a gesture. a test or a signal. If that doesn't disturb you yet, wait, there's more. Because while agencies began to correct their datasets, something else happened outside the official channels. Radio telescopes, quiet ones maintained by universities or lone researchers, ones that weren't funded by government programs, they heard something, a ping. At 144 gigahertz, a number that will mean nothing to most people. But to those who tune into the void, that's the hydrogen line, the frequency of neutral hydrogen, the universal language of astronomy, the frequency you would use if you wanted your message to be heard by someone intelligent somewhere else. Coincidence or handshake? You can decide, but only if you stay. Because this is not just a story of a rock speeding up. It's a story about a silence that grew teeth, about images that vanished from official browsers, and about the one thing you're never supposed to ask, who is watching who? July 4th, 2025, the first Independence Day of an uneasy summer sky. While most of the Western world was distracted by fireworks and celebration, one person, a quiet hobbyist in the suburbs of Perth, Australia, did something that no billion-dollar telescope bothered to do that week. He pointed his personal reflector toward the coordinates of 3I Atlas and took the photo NASA wouldn't show you. It was a simple telescope, no adaptive optics, no space-grade lens, just patience, the right sky conditions, and a camera lens that didn't know it wasn't supposed to reveal anything new. What he captured was wrong. Not just a comet, not just a streak. A line, a clean, narrow jet, not flaring outward like ordinary outgassing, but stretched in a precise, almost intentional direction. Not pointing away from the sun as comets naturally do, but angled, offset, as if someone or something had adjusted the thrust. The photo shook online forums more than any scientific paper that week. It didn't go viral. It went quiet, because by the time it reached its first 1,000 views, it was already gone. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Things only get deleted that fast when they shouldn't exist. Let's break down why this photo matters. Comet jets are chaotic, random. They flare, they dissipate, they glow at odd angles. But they do not, ever, produce a straight, stable, pencil-thin beam that holds its shape across multiple frames of exposure. Unless it's not a comet jet. Unless it's a nozzle. Let me put this in simpler terms. For anyone who's ever wondered what artificial thrust would look like from 60 million miles away, exactly like this. A faint line of light moving against the tail. Not reacting to heat, not bending away from the sun. Just moving. That was the moment the first real question hit the astronomer message boards. Why does this comet seem to be steering? By the following morning, the photo vanished from the mainstream web. All public mirrors of it on Reddit, Smithsonian Skywatch, and a European amateur radio site, dead links. No explanation, no apology, just 404. But the internet has one rule. What's deleted doesn't die. It distributes. Screenshots appeared. Archived reposts in dead forums, a few in encrypted astronomy Discord servers, and one version, metadata intact, uploaded to a server in Romania. It's that version that revealed something darker. The file wasn't just taken down. It had been flagged. Its EXIF log showed a warning label layered into it on re-upload. Classified, removed from public catalog. No photographer labels, no telescope data. It had been sanitized. You don't sanitize a random sky photo. You don't classify the amateur shot of a passing comet, unless it wasn't just a comet, unless it wasn't just a photo. Let's think this through. NASA hadn't released a high-res image yet. ESA hadn't scheduled their public update. Atlas released blurry, low-fidelity visuals. And suddenly, a lone amateur breaks the pattern with a sharper, more revealing frame. That shouldn't happen. Unless someone miscalculated, unless the sky is not as easy to control as a press conference. One commenter asked the obvious question, why didn't NASA share this image? The most upvoted reply said, because you weren't supposed to see it, that's why. Pause for a moment. If a $200 backyard telescope captured more detail than a 1.8-meter professional instrument, someone should be embarrassed or suspicious. Yet instead of getting an explanation, everyone got silence. No debunk, no misinterpretation, just a removal. Isn't it strange? The more mundane an object is, the faster the experts explain it. But the moment something doesn't fit, the explanations go quiet. So here's the question that froze the forums that night. If this was all just ice and dust, why did it need to be erased? The real problem wasn't the image itself. It was what came next. Less than 48 hours after the deletion, the official NASA entry for 3I Atlas was quietly edited. One number changed, just one. The recorded non-gravitational acceleration, 0.020/S2, was replaced by blank space. A page note replaced the value with 3 words, data under review. A billion-dollar space agency withdrew a confirmed measurement after a random guy with a telescope uploaded a photo. Coincidence or choreographed silence? This is where the investigation really begins. Because this isn't just about a single photo, it's about what it forced into the open. That there's a gap, a very real, very intentional gap, between what's being observed and what we're being told. And when a blackout happens on page 1, the story on page 2 is never what they want you to read. It wasn't the photo that broke the silence. It was the sound, or rather, the absence of sound, interrupted by a single, haunting pulse. July 8, 2025, the University of British Columbia Radio Astronomy Lab released a 14-second clip, not to the public, but to a private academic thread, marked for collaborative review. A minor file buried in a larger thread of atmospheric RF scans. But one student assistant, the kind of person who stays up late listening to cosmic static like it's a symphony, noticed something the senior researchers ignored. A pulse. Exactly 1.44 gigahertz. Repeating every 7 seconds. That number, 0.44, meant nothing to the average person. It wasn't a prime number. It wasn't a pretty round value. But to anyone in astrophysics or SETI, that number burns. Because 1.44 is right next to the hydrogen line. The same narrowband frequency hydrogen emits, the most abundant element in the universe. If there is a cosmic language, this is the alphabet it begins with. If there is a frequency engineered for someone else to hear, it starts here. But wasn't this just space noise? Radio scatter? Microwave interference? That was the first assumption, until they checked the direction of the signal. It wasn't coming from deep space. It wasn't coming from a star. It was moving, and it was locked to the coordinates of 3I Atlas. Now pause, just long enough to think about what that means. You have an object moving through the solar system at interstellar velocity. It accelerates without apparent propulsion. It's visual. Tail doesn't obey sunlight. And now it's pulsing at the frequency of hydrogen on a regular interval. Something that looks like a beat. Something stable. Something timed, not random, not geological, not organic. It was at this point the lab should have taken it public. But they didn't. Instead, the file was removed from the academic network. The corresponding folder was locked. And 3 days later, the lab director gave a 3-line response to an amateur inquiry. We registered nothing of note. No signal was confirmed. The inquiry is closed. Inquiry closed, just like the amateur's photo that wasn't supposed to exist. But silence is never empty. Not in space, not in institutions. Because while the official channels withdrew, unofficial ones erupted. A clip of the pulse, low quality, grainy but real, surfaced on a private astronomy Discord server. The forum lit up. It's hitting exactly the hydrogen band. No natural source known with that timing. This looks like a handshake signal. They didn't say it was communication. They didn't jump to conclusions. But they did notice what was missing. No harmonics, no scatter, no background noise. If you're not familiar with radio astronomy, here's the rule. The universe is messy, random, scattershot, blended. No natural signal is that clean, that focused, that empty around the edges, unless it's engineered. Here's the part that changes everything. That signal wasn't recorded once. It was recorded 3 times by 3 independent observatories, all within a 72-hour window, all matching the trajectory of 3I Atlas, 3 times, 3 receivers. One source. Still coincidence? Here's the thought experiment one forum user posted, the kind that gets ignored when the world wants to stay calm. What if it's not sending anything? What if it's listening? Let that idea sit in your chest for a moment. Because it's not the high-power broadcast of a beacon. It's the quiet pulse of a scanner. A radar ping. A heartbeat used to measure distance or presence. In the darkness of space, nothing needs to shout. Sometimes a whisper tells you more, and yet, when the data was pulled, when the thread was locked, when the official report corrected itself, no one from NASA, ESA, or the IAU made a statement, not even to dismiss it, not even to reassure us. You know what's scarier than a rejected explanation? No explanation at all. So let's review what we have compared to what we're told. A comet that accelerates without losing mass, a jet pointing the wrong direction, a photo that got erased, a frequency that shouldn't exist, and a silence that keeps growing. This is no longer about theory. This is about absence, about gaps in the story that can no longer be accidental. So once again, the question lingers in the dark corridor between science and secrecy. Who's listening? To who? There's a comforting story we tell ourselves about comets. They're ancient, harmless, time capsules of frozen dust and forgotten elements, drifters from the far corners of the solar system, or beyond, obeying the timeless ballet of gravity and sunlight. But that story only works when comets behave. When they lose mass, they slow down. When they're hit by solar wind, they flare out. When they vent gases, they spiral, tumble, or drift unpredictably. So what do you do with an object that doesn't behave like a comet, but is called one anyway? You start to understand the difference between information and narrative. Let's strip this down. No speculation, no leaps. Normal comet behavior. Jets point away from the sun. Activity increases near perihelion due to heating. Mass loss equals predictable deceleration. 3I or Atlas behavior. One narrow jet off-axis. Acceleration increases after solar approach. No coma expansion consistent with the thrust observed. Do you see it yet? If 3I Atlas is a comet, then it's the first comet we've ever observed that gains speed while losing no measurable mass. If it's outgassing, then it's doing so through a single nozzle with a precision that seems almost engineered. And if it's reflecting sunlight, then why is its brightness profile inconsistent with its calculated mass? Here's the math that should bother you. The amount of thrust required to produce the observed acceleration of 0.020 ms, sustained over 50 days, requires a loss of at least 108 kilograms of cometary material. That is 100 million kilograms. A comet losing that much mass? You'd see it. You'd see the plume. You'd see the coma explode outward like a dying breath. But we don't. We see a stable object with a thin, directed jet and no evidence of mass dispersal. Imagine someone tells you a car lost its wheels, but it kept driving in a straight line, no wobble, no skid, no dip in velocity. Could you accept that? Or would you ask what else might be under the hood? Now here's where the puzzle gets even more curious. NASA's official model for 3 Atlas was derived using data from the JPL Horizon system, the same system used to calculate thousands of stable orbits for asteroids, spacecraft, probes, and other interstellar bodies. Shortly after the acceleration was detected, the model disappeared from public view. The entire data table was taken offline for correction. Offline for correction. You don't correct a table, you correct an assumption, because if you admit the model was wrong, then you must admit what made it wrong. And in this case, it wasn't gravity, it wasn't temperature, it wasn't rotation, it was something else. Here's the irony. The more NASA clarified the anomaly, the less the anomaly made sense. They explained nothing, but corrected everything, and then they moved on. But the universe didn't move on. Because while the scientists wiped the board clean, amateurs never stopped looking. They ran independent coma analysis. They looked at photometric scatter. They pulled public exposure frames with rudimentary deconvolution tools. And the result? No coma expansion, equals no significant mass loss, which means either the comet is expelling mass invisible to every instrument on Earth, or it's not a comet. Hold that thought. Pause again and think like someone who's spent a lifetime staring at the sky. Inner solar system comets are noisy. They scream their identity. Gas clouds, chaotic debris, violent trails of sublimation. 3I Atlas is quiet, suspiciously quiet, like a stranger passing through a crowded room without so much as brushing a shoulder. Does that sound like ice or intention? Now, before the skeptics swallow this whole and call it fantasy, let's break the tension with a question. Does an anomaly stop being real just because someone important won't explain it? Think about it. If a ship sails across a dark ocean without a wake, is it less of a ship? Or is it using the water better than we understand? And what if the ocean isn't water, but space? One of the oldest lies in science is this: if we didn't detect it, it doesn't exist. But the silence of 3I Atlas doesn't say nothing. It says hidden. It says calculated. It says not meant to be seen. And that's all before we get to the real fracture point, the one that changes this from curious to concerning. Because the moment it became clear 3I Atlas wasn't shedding mass like a comet, every chart, every model, every official narrative should have changed. But they didn't. Instead, the language changed. Under investigation. Awaiting further data. Not enough evidence for assertion. That is not science. That is hesitation wearing a lab coat. And here's what hesitation always hides. Fear. The kind of fear that doesn't come from not knowing, but from knowing and not being allowed to say. If the object isn't what they say it is, if it isn't behaving like it's supposed to, if it's accelerating in silence while shedding nothing, then you can sit here in the dark with me and admit it. We're not being told what they know, maybe not the whole story, maybe just the parts that make sleep easier. But here's the truth anyway. Silence doesn't prevent panic. It postpones it. And right now, so many voices are holding their breath, waiting for someone else to speak first. But that's the problem. No one wants to say it. What if this is no comet at all? By July 12, 2025, the world should have been talking about the object's velocity, or its mass, or the fact that it came from a place where no known comet family was ever cataloged. But instead, something else took center stage. Something too small for the headlines, too sharp for the press releases, and too strange to ignore. A jet. One single, thin, persistent jet of material, coming from the kid. Wrong direction. If you've ever watched footage of a comet near the sun, you know the way the jets behave. They look like wild flares, bursting from pockets of sublimating ice. They spiral, bend, fragment, driven by heat and light. That's not what happened here. In the limited images captured before NASA began restricting access, this jet, all 18 pixels of it, revealed a narrow beam of gas and dust that was shockingly straight, as if it were being directed. Worse, or better, depending on how deeply you want to stare into the implication, it wasn't pointing away from the sun. It was angled, off by nearly 37 degrees. Not reacting, not responding, but adjusting, like thrust. Let me pause there. Because thrust isn't a word used lightly in astronomy. You don't ascribe intention to a rock unless something in you is ready to break with comfort. But here's the anomaly. If the jet were caused by solar heating, it would be flaring directly away from the sun like a sail whipped by wind. That's cometary 101. Yet this jet didn't line up with that reaction. Instead, it looked like a burn, a maneuver, a course correction. And if you're still skeptical, good. That means you're paying attention. Because here's where things get even more unsettling. An amateur astronomer in Chile, using a 0.5-meter telescope and a basic CCD camera, recorded a time-lapse across 3 nights. In frame after frame, the jet stayed pointed in the same direction, relative to the object, not the sun. Think of a spinning top in outer space. If it's just ice, it's chaotic. Jets flare, the tail jitters. If it's not ice and the jet maintains navigation alignment, then you know it's not reacting. It's directing. Even in the amateur's raw footage, if you overlay the frames, the jet remains rigid as the background stars shift. That's not nature. That's control. Let me say the quiet part out loud. If this is thrust, then 3I Atlas is no longer a passive object drifting through a gravitational field. It's an active body in motion, with the ability to change its own trajectory, and that would mean it knows where it's going. Here's where NASA made a mistake. 2 days after those amateur photos circulated in encrypted Skywatch channels, NASA released an updated trajectory model, corrected for solar radiation pressure. The revised simulation showed a slight change, a few thousand kilometers off the previous arc, but they didn't mention the directional jet. They didn't address why the thrust vector didn't align with heat flow physics. They didn't explain why the updated model behaved exactly as if a force had been applied. Sometimes the most powerful admission is not in the words someone says, but in the math they don't dispute, and the math says something pushed 3I Atlas. That begs a question no scientist wanted to type, let alone speak aloud. Who or what is pushing back? Even without making assumptions, one thing is clear. If the jet is intentional, then the object is not dead, not passive, not a frozen time capsule from a distant galaxy. But something else, a vessel, a probe, a scout, a beacon? The sky doesn't answer, but it hints. If an object is adjusting its path, then someone or something cares about the path. And if the path crosses Earth's orbital plane, the clock is not just ticking, it's counting something. Still, the agencies remain silent. Not a word from JPL, no press Q&A, no public notes about the jet. Just one simple clinical update to their model, as though what we've observed has always been part of the plan. The difference between concealment and control is only ever time. So let's end with the line that kept surfacing in those amateur threads. A comet that changes course isn't a comet, it's a choice. Every investigation has a fracture point, a moment when the official story begins to wobble under the weight of details too jagged to fit. For 3I Atlas, that crack opened on July 14, 2025 at 11:27 p.m. UTC. It didn't come from NASA. It didn't come from a peer-reviewed journal or a televised press release. It came from a tiny, unnoticed thread on an obscure subreddit. The post was anonymous. The username, Vector Silence. The title, Stop Calling It a Comet, I Have Access, Ask Me Anything. The post stayed up for just 46 minutes before the account was deleted. But by then, it had been screen capped, shared to roving astronomy servers, and reposted to encrypted forums. The kind usually used by people who don't trust how clean the world looks from the outside. Here's what the leak said, without edits, in full, before it vanished. I work for one of the Lagrange point observation teams, not a grad student, not a contractor, full-time clearance. The object you're calling 3I Atlas is not reacting to solar radiation. Our models are wrong. What's driving the change is not gas output. It's something else, something periodic. Also, stop looking at the visual spectrum. That's not where the signal is. Vector Silence. Before we go deeper, here's why this matters. The Lagrange points are not run by amateurs. They're where Earth-coordinated deep space monitoring takes place. Multi-agency, multinational, long-term outposts. The leak wasn't sensational, it wasn't panicked, it was precise. That's how real leaks sound. Restrained, specific, almost cold. Like facts being smuggled past a locked door. Within minutes, hundreds of comments flooded the thread. What do you mean, periodic? Do you have a timestamp? Show us proof, even redacted. Are you saying the force is internal? Which L point are you at? Vector Silence replied only twice. You're all looking in the wrong wavelength. It's not noise, it's cadence. 20 minutes later, the account disappeared. The original post was removed. The Reddit profile was wiped clean. The cached copies expired by the next morning. One line from a reply stuck with the survivors of that thread. Every 7 seconds, you'll understand later. Now, let's connect this to what we already know. We have a consistent 1.44 GHz broadcast-like signal, repeating every 7 seconds, locked to the position of 3I Atlas correlating with its acceleration spikes. And now a leak from within a high-level observation post says we should not be calling it a comet, that there's periodicity, and that the signal is hidden outside the visible range. This is where silence starts sounding like strategy. Because 2 hours after the leak post vanished, the official NASA JPL page for 3I Atlas was updated again. Not a press release, not a comment, not even an explanation. Just this: spectral data review in progress, photo updates temporarily suspended, no further elaboration, no reason given. You know what happens when someone tries to shut a door in a dark room? The people inside start looking for windows. The community didn't quiet down after the leak. It ignited. Amateur astronomers pulled spectrum data from raw satellite feeds. Skywatchers tracked the 1.44 GHz ping on amateur-grade radio dishes. Citizen scientists started to sync timestamps on the pulse. And here's the disturbing revelation they landed on. The pulse didn't start when the object became visible. It started long before, meaning 3I Atlas wasn't calling out to the solar system when we saw it. It was already calling. The leak may have been brief. It may have been anonymous. But it was enough. Enough to puncture the illusion of complete certainty. Enough to show, not that this object was alien, but that somebody, somewhere, didn't want us asking the wrong questions. And here's the one question that grew teeth after the silence. If this isn't propulsion, then why does it sound like a clock? July 30th, 2025, the day 3I Atlas reached perihelion, the closest point in its journey toward the sun. A moment that should have lit the sky with heat, ice vapor, and tail expansion, just like every other comet before it. Except this one didn't flare. It vanished, not exploded, not burned, not even dimmed gradually. It simply went dark. No one expected that. Not astronomers, not agencies, not amateurs with telescopes pointed to the exact coordinates at the correct moment. It wasn't a gradual fade-out. It wasn't an interference error. It was a blackout. For 48 hours, every instrument, space-based and ground, recorded nothing. No photons, no infrared, no radio pulse, a solid radio silence. The kind that hits you harder the longer you stare at it. This wasn't a glitch of observation. Telescopes don't blink together. This wasn't solar interference. We've seen comets survive closer and scream with ultraviolet brightness as they die in heat. This wasn't a hardware fault. Not when it occurred across 4 different space agencies, 5 academic observatories, and countless backyard telescopes running on consumer-grade optics. No, this was absence. Silence with intention. A disappearance by design. Let's clarify what should have happened. As 3I Atlas approached within 0.73 AU of the Sun, the increase in solar radiation should have triggered its sublimation, an outpouring of volatile gases, creating the brightest, most visible phase of any comet's life cycle. That's when they bloom. They shimmer. They're unmistakable. But this comet didn't bloom. It blinked out. The first alert came not from NASA or ESA, but from a retired schoolteacher in Osaka, Japan, tracking what he believed would be the object's most visible stretch. Here's what he posted to his Sky Journal just before midnight UTC. Object didn't brighten. It just stopped. I thought my lens fogged. I checked. It's not there. Within hours, other amateurs confirmed the same thing. Nothing. No trace. Just an empty patch of sky. And yet, during that same window, something else happened. At 0342 UTC, a series of communications went dark. Archived live streams from sky tracking stations went offline. Data from the Lagrange 2 Solar and Heliospheric Observatory suddenly showing maintenance. During the most anticipated observation window of an interstellar object, ask yourself, does the sun care about maintenance schedules, or do we? Here's the unspoken rule of cosmic observation. If it's visible, someone sees it. If no one sees it, that means someone made sure they couldn't. Let's review the facts, not the theories. 3I Atlas didn't flare at perihelion. Infrared signatures dropped to baseline solar interference levels. The hydrogen band radio pulse stopped exactly 12 minutes before optical loss. All public-facing monitoring streams went offline almost simultaneously. Not a natural curve, not cosmic randomness, a perfect synchronized cut. When the object re-emerged, and yes, it did reappear, it was not in the same trajectory. It wasn't even in the same attitude. Its axis of light reflection had shifted. Its orientation had rotated. Its surface brightness had dropped, subtly but measurably, as if someone reset it, as if perihelion wasn't a burn-up moment, but a maneuver. If this unnerves you, it should, because when an object goes dark during the most observable part of its orbit and comes back with a new heading, you're not watching an accident, you're watching an operation. The most haunting comment from that 2-day blackout came from a retired ESA physicist, still active under a pseudonym in a private astronomy channel. If it were a comet dying, we'd have seen its death. If it were a rock exploding, we'd have seen the pieces. But we didn't. Which means someone, or something, didn't want us to. And so the narrative didn't die. It sharpened, not into certainty, but into suspicion. Because the question that lingered longer than the blackout was not, where did it go? But simply, who turned it off? Silence isn't neutral. Not in space. Not in science. Not when it happens all at once, and right when you need sound the most. July 31st, 2025, the second day of the blackout. The last hour before 3A Atlas was predicted to reappear from behind the sun. People were waiting, telescope arrays were pointed, live streams were queued, dozens of amateurs had posted countdowns. "We'll see it again in 11 hours, one post said. "Unless something's wrong," replied another, and then something was wrong, because before the object returned, every major live stream tracking it, NASA, ESA, the Virtual Telescope Project, the Keck Observatory feed, suddenly went dark, not pixelated, not washed out by sunlight, not interrupted by solar flares or atmospheric distortion. Offline, in maintenance, internal review, temporarily unavailable, every feed. At the same time, not a glitch, not random, a blackout before a return. And like gravity, silence draws attention to itself. One moment, the astronomy world is watching. The next, it's blind. But while the official channels went dark, the unofficial ones woke up. That night, while the world waited for a comet that didn't want to be seen, 3 different amateur radio dishes recorded something else entirely. A pulse, brief, sharp, unmistakable, 1.44 gigahertz. Then silence again. 13 seconds, another pulse, 13 seconds. And then, nothing. Why does that matter? Because 1.44 gigahertz wasn't seen during perihelion. It was heard after. Exactly as the object re-entered observable space, a beacon signal, a directional ping, a resynchronization, the skeptical mind can choose any word it likes. But cannot deny this. Sound returned before sight. That's not how nature works. That's how a transmission works. One of the amateur radio groups in Portugal decoded the pulse pattern and noticed something eerie. The signal wasn't a continuous wave. It wasn't random scatter. It had structure. Meaning, it turned on, transmitted precisely for a measured duration, then turned off. Like a lighthouse in the ocean fog. Not a star. Not a flare. A deliberate punctuation. This is where things take a darker turn. Because the timing of that pulse, 1.44 GHz at 12:33 UTC, came 3 hours before any public-facing observatory brought their live streams back online. In other words, the object spoke again before Earth was allowed to see it again. And when the live streams finally returned, they all skipped the moment of reappearance. Not one frame recorded the instant of emergence. The first new image of 3I Atlas showed it already in motion, already past the predicted re-entry line, already changed. What changed? Its albedo. The light it reflects had dropped by 3%. Its angular rotation had shifted by 12 degrees. Its calculated mass had uncertainties. Translated, it wasn't the same anymore. The object we lost at perihelion wasn't the same object that came back. Someone called it the Atlas offset, a glitch in the continuity of an object that shouldn't glitch. You don't replace a comet's interior in 48 hours. You don't alter a natural body's reflectivity in the dark, but machines can be serviced, probes can be reoriented, drones can reboot after a command, or run silent until it matters. One forum member wrote, "This isn't an object that disappeared, it's an object that went offline." Another replied, and came back with a software update. That line, half sarcastic, half serious, spread faster than any official report. Because while NASA and ESA kept their distance from anomaly language, every amateur felt the same cold truth. This thing didn't vanish. It paused. Not dead. Not gone. Witnessed, controlled. Silence may not prove intelligence, but coordinated silence whispers of intent. Because when an object stops broadcasting before it's watched and starts again before it's allowed to be seen, you are not looking at space debris. You are looking at behavior. And here's the part that no one wants to admit. If it's behaving, then it may be watching. And if it's watching, then maybe we weren't meant to see it at all. August 2nd, 2025, 3 days after the blackout. 3 days after 3I Atlas re-emerged with new rotational parameters, new albedo readings, and a trail of missing observational data no one could account for. That's when the shape appeared, not in an official release, not in a press briefing, but in a low-contrast, nearly invisible patch of pixels, buried inside raw telemetry data posted by an intern-level telescope operator in Chile who had no idea what he was about to reveal. To most eyes, the image meant nothing. A blur. A stretched glow. A smudge against the ink of the void. But someone, a software hobbyist from Warsaw with no degree and a suspiciously powerful denoising algorithm, did the unthinkable. He sharpened it. And for the first time since Oumuamua, an interstellar object displayed a shape that refused to fit the script. Not spherical, not fragment-like, not irregularly rotating like a tumbling comet, but elongated. Uniform, with straight-edged symmetry. "It looks built," the first comment read. "Like a beam," another said. "No," a third wrote, "like a ship." No one wanted to say the word out loud. Not yet. But they all thought it artificial. Even in its blurred state, the proportions wouldn't go away. Length at least 3 to 4 times its width. Surface too smooth for frozen gas. Brightness curve too consistent for random rock. A cylinder, a shard, a probe. It didn't matter what name people gave it. What mattered were the proportions, the undeniable geometry. Here's what natural comets don't do. Form perfect, straight edges. Rotate around a long axis with stabilized motion. Maintain a consistent surface luminance without glint or flare. Here's what artificial objects do. Optimize shape for structural integrity. Stabilize spin for energy distribution. Keep reflective uniformity for stealth, heat shedding, or scanning. And this object? It passed every test in the second list, and none of the first. Here's the observation that froze the skywatchers. In the enhanced reconstruction, the object didn't look fully round or fully smooth. It had faint ridging, line-like indentations running along its length, not craters, not natural fissures, but panels, segments, joined lines, a chassis. Someone in the thread wrote, "This is not a comet, it's a hull." And for a moment, the silence hit harder than any signal, any leak, any blackout before it. Because this wasn't just data, it was a shape, a body, a form that for the first time forced the question out of the shadows and into the open thread of a public space. Are we still trying to explain this, or are we avoiding what it looks like? That thread lasted 10 hours. Long enough for thousands to view it, long enough to spark arguments, denial, fascination, and raw panic. Then, it was gone. The forum admin later posted a short message. "We had to remove the file. Legal notice received. Can't say more." No further explanation, but the image lived on. Reshared in private channels, uploaded to peer-to-peer archives, mirror sites, dark storage, like the first blurry ultrasound of a truth no one asked for, but can't look away from anymore. And yet, as always, the silence grew. NASA still didn't release any high-resolution imaging. They posted only light curves, without photos. All mention of shape classification was labeled undetermined, even though the amateurs already saw enough to know it has an edge. A body, a structure, and structure is not a comet. If you felt the air change just now, you're not alone, because this was the moment 3I Atlas stopped being a mystery and started being an answer. Maybe not the full one. Maybe one we aren't ready for, but still a visible truth. And before logic, before certainty, before equations and models and mainstream denials, comes that ancient primal flicker we all feel when we see something that doesn't belong: recognition. And the question that now hums under everything we've learned so far: what kind of intelligence lets you see its shape, just long enough to question if you were meant to? By August 7th, 2025, the shape of 3I Atlas was no longer a rumor. It was a problem. Not just for the astronomers who still insisted on calling it a comet, not just for the agencies who refused to release full-resolution images, but for physics itself, because with shape comes density, and with density comes mass. And the mass of 3I Atlas made no sense. Let's walk through the math, gently. The object's apparent brightness, when converted through standard albedo models, should give us an estimate of its size and reflectivity. But when amateur calculations were cross-referenced with JPL's own estimates, the numbers didn't line up. According to the official light curve data, 3I Atlas should have had the mass of a medium to large asteroid, roughly 1013 kilograms. Yet its acceleration, the tiny but measurable push away from pure gravity, implied a mass at least 100 times lower. That's not an error, that's an impossibility. Unless the object is hollow. The object is not what it appears to be on the surface. The object's brightness is artificial, reflective, not emitted. Put simply, 3I Atlas reflects more light than it should if it's made of rock, but moves as if it weighs much less than it should if it's made of ice. In other words, it's too light to be what it looks like, and too bright to be what it weighs. Let that sink in. A natural object, a comet, an asteroid, a fragment, obeys gravity, mass, and inertia. But this seems to fake its mass, which leads us to one terrifyingly elegant possibility. It's made of different materials than anything we've cataloged. Here's where the silence from NASA and ESA grows thick. They haven't said a single word about mass since the perihelion blackout. There's been no correction, no revised calculation, no updated density estimates, just a quiet omission. The kind that turns absence into a louder signal than any press briefing. But here's what the amateurs won't stop asking, and what the public still doesn't know they're being shielded from. How can something appear solid but behave light? Unless it isn't solid in the way we understand it. Unless the surface isn't surface, but shell. Unless the interior isn't rock, but void. And here's where history taps us on the shoulder like a ghost. This isn't the first time an interstellar object has forced us to rethink what's possible. Oumuamua did this in 2017. A cigar-shaped, non-sublimating body with non-gravitational acceleration. The first time we saw something out of place. But 3I Atlas isn't repeating Oumuamua's mystery. It's escalating it. Same anomalies, bolder behavior, clearer signals. So what does that tell us? That the lesson wasn't learned, or wasn't meant to be. Here's something else, a detail buried deep in the sensor logs. In the first 48 hours after reappearance, 3I Atlas produced an unusual scatter profile under laser ranging. One scientist put it this way, anonymously. It came back more matte than before. Reflectivity changed. That only happens if there was a coating or surface reset. Surface reset. The phrase sends a chill through the enthusiasts because there's only one reason to reset a surface in space: thermal regulation, signature mitigation, or, more ominously, protection after activation. What if the surface change wasn't a flaw, but a feature? What if the mass mismatch isn't a calculation error, but a message? What if this object isn't failing the laws of physics, but applying them better than we do? Call it speculation. Call it heresy. Call it hypothesis. But now we are left staring at the truth that haunts the darkness, an object that weighs too little to be stone, reflects too much to be ice, moves too precisely to be a fragment, not solid, not random, not natural. Then what? That's not a scientific gap, that's a door, and someone, or something, left it unlocked. Trajectory is supposed to be the most predictable part of orbital mechanics. You know the mass, you calculate the speed, gravity handles the rest, except when it doesn't. By August 14, 2025, the math on 3I Atlas had stopped behaving. The same equations that predicted its approach now failed to explain its future path. Not just once, not just by a rounding error, but by a deviation growing daily. Let me make that very clear. For the first time in recorded space observation, an interstellar object refused to stay inside its own calculated orbit, not because of a gravitational pull, not because of solar radiation pressure, not because of mass loss from sublimation, but because the object appeared to choose a slightly altered course, without expelling enough matter to justify the observed change. That is not a comet's behavior. That's a trajectory that refuses to stay predicted. NASA hasn't acknowledged this in public. But a fragment from a leaked email thread, shared by a junior analyst who no longer works at the agency, puts it bluntly: we've rerun the trajectory 200 times with every force model available. Nothing matches. The deviation is non-ballistic, meaning it's not simply falling or drifting. Something is inputting force. Non-ballistic. That word changed everything, because space objects, natural ones, have no agency. They don't decide how they move. They don't adjust course. They obey physics with no deviation unless they're not just moving, unless they're navigating. Let's pause. There's a concept in space science called minimum energy trajectory. Every object, from asteroid to satellite, takes the lowest energy path unless pushed by a foreign force. 3I Atlas is not doing that. It's burning energy, in some form, to create displacement. But where is it coming from? The answer isn't in thrust. It isn't in visible jets. It isn't in expelled material. Sensors detect no outgassing consistent with the shift. And yet, every 48 to 72 hours, the predicted position and the observed one are drifting apart, subtly, steadily, deliberately. If this continues into September, the projected path will no longer intersect with the original missed distance at all. And that should terrify you more than an impact trajectory, because it means we are not the ones tracking it anymore. It's the object that's outmaneuvering us. And here's the final blow in this chapter. Two agency insiders, speaking separately, used identical phrasing in private. The object is not falling toward a gravity well, it is falling into a plan. A rock doesn't fall into a plan. A relic doesn't reorient itself. A dead object doesn't revise its own future. So if the math no longer predicts it, what does? Its maker. On the night of September 3, 2025, at 02:14 UTC, something happened that no official report would ever admit. A signal was picked up, not by NASA, not by the ESA, not by the Deep Space Network, but by a privately owned radio telescope array in Queensland, Australia, a cluster of modified dishes operated by a retired engineer named Graham Hall. Hall wasn't looking for extraterrestrial life. He wasn't tracking 3I Atlas on purpose. He was scanning the 1.4 GHz hydrogen line, a frequency band that, for decades, has been regarded as the cosmic neutral zone. Too quiet for cosmic noise, too universal for accidental chatter, too obvious for anyone who knows how to speak across stars. The hydrogen line is where you would send a message on purpose, and on that night, at 02:14 UTC, the silence cracked. A pulse, then a pause, then two pulses, then silence again. Total duration, 9.5 seconds. Frequency, 1.420405 GHz. Direction of origin, constellation. Cetus, right where 3I Atlas was passing. Hall thought it was interference, static, equipment failure, a glitch in the receiver chain. But the recording was intact. And the pattern did not belong to any known cosmic signature. He uploaded it to a small astronomy forum under the title, Detected Odd 1.4 GHz Blips from Region Near Atlas. Anyone else getting this? Within 6 hours, the post was gone. The account deleted. The entire thread purged, but not before someone archived the audio. And here's the most unsettling part. 2 nights later, a second signal was recorded. Same frequency, same direction, but this time the pulse count matched the previously observed course deviation intervals of the object. In other words, the frequency wasn't just a signal. It was a reply. Let that sink in. A trajectory shift in deep space. A pulse in the hydrogen band, on matching intervals. Not random, not noise, not accidental. Pattern, response. Motion, whisper. So what did Graham Hall do? He submitted the data to 3 institutions, the SETI Institute, the CSIRO, and the Australian Space Agency. None replied, but within 48 hours, 2 government vehicles parked outside his rural property. No badges, no insignia, just a conversation. You didn't detect anything. You don't want the attention that comes with insisting you did. His equipment was confiscated as part of an interference investigation. He hasn't spoken publicly since, but the archived file is still out there. Thousands have heard it, many dismissed it, but a few recognized what it might mean. This wasn't a beacon, it wasn't a broadcast. It was a handshake, a kind of cosmic, "I hear you too." If 3i Atlas is emitting a reply, then we are not observing a rock from another star. We're listening to an interaction, an exchange, which leaves us with a terrifying, unanswered question. Who, or what, is talking back? There's an old saying in the world of classified science: if you want to hide a truth, don't bury it, break it into footnotes and scatter them across 100 memos. That's exactly what happened with 3i Atlas, because as the object became stranger, as the signals became sharper, as the trajectory stopped fitting physics, the official reports stopped getting longer. They didn't get more detailed, they got shorter, and they all started ending at the same place. Page 3. Take the NASA Technical Memorandum dated August 9, 2025, a document titled Preliminary Assessment of Non-Gravitational Influences on 3i Atlas. Page 1. Object Characteristics. Page 2. Light curve data. Page 3. Minor mentions of possible unknown variables. Page 4. Missing, saying. Then there's the ESA's Interstellar Object Synopsis, published August 18th. Page 1. Object Velocity and Albedo. Page 2. Perihelion Anomaly Review. Page 3. Further data under review. Page 4. Redacted. Same pattern in JPL's Internal Orbital Dynamics Review. Same disappearing page. 3 different agencies. 3 different reports. All reaching a ceiling they aren't allowed to speak through. It didn't take long for independent analysts to notice. A community of retired aerospace engineers and data archivists called it the Page 3 Wall. And they started asking, why does every public report stop where the anomaly begins? Here's what they found. Each missing page, each invisible footnote, lined up with the same timeline. Detection of the single off-axis jet. The first 1.44 GHz burst. The mass discrepancy after reappearance. The failed propagation of the expected trajectory. Every time the object violated expectation, the report violated transparency. Coincidence? Only if you believe silence is random. But the deeper they dug, the darker the pattern got. Someone noticed a curious phrase repeated in all 3 reports. Further disclosure pending protocol review. Protocol review, a phrase that appears only in 2 cases, when evidence affects national security, when science enters a classified domain. So what domain is 3i Atlas being filtered into? Not scientific, strategic. This isn't about a rock from another star, it's about ownership of the unknown. And here's the unspoken rule in classified science. If something isn't a threat, it's public. If something can't be explained, it's monitored. If something might be intelligent, it's buried. And then one more anomaly surfaces. Every official report, across every space agency, now lists 3i Atlas under the same growing label. Interstellar object of unresolved origin. Not comet, not asteroid, not natural body. Unresolved origin. That's how institutions say the one thing they're not allowed to say: we don't know, or we don't get to tell. It gets worse. When an independent researcher filed a FOIA request for additional pages from the NASA memo, the response came back with a single sentence. This material has been classified in accordance with Section 215 of the Space Domain Regulations. And what falls under Section 215? Extraterrestrial technology. Unknown intelligences, anomalous maneuvering bodies, which means somewhere in a locked office behind a badge and biometric scanner, the missing pages exist. They're not lost, they're withheld. The public gets 3 pages. The truth is on page 4. So here's the question that burns brighter than any data. What do you hide from 7 billion people that's more dangerous than the fear of the unknown? There's an old superstition in aerospace circles, not written in books, not listed in manuals, but whispered in hangars, briefing rooms, and late-night radio frequencies. The truth doesn't leak from beginners. It bleeds from the old guard. And that's exactly what began to happen when 3I Atlas crossed the line between anomaly and threat. It started subtly. A side comment in an anonymous forum, a vague line in a podcast transcript, a grainy webcam clip of a retired navigation officer speaking hypothetically about off-axis acceleration. Then, on August 23rd, everything changed. 3 former space agency insiders from 3 different countries came forward in a single synchronized leak. Not to a journalist, not to a tabloid, but to a private invitation-only online symposium hosted by the Global Astronautics Archive, a digital refuge for retired scientists who didn't believe all truths should die with them. Their names were redacted in the recording that later circulated, but the voices were undeniable. 1 American, 1 Russian, 1 Japanese, all speaking under the same condition. We can't show documents, but we can still speak. And what they said shattered the wall of plausible deniability. Leak number 1, the American, former JPL mission engineer. His voice was steady, precise, the voice of someone who had sat in too many rooms where the air was thicker than classified ink. We've modeled 3I Atlas using every natural force we know of. None explain the burn vector. Unless you introduce a non-localized internal impulse, something that doesn't vent mass the way comets do. That only leaves 2 options: advanced propulsion or physics we aren't cleared to understand. He paused. And no one is writing papers about option 2. Leak number 2, the Russian, ex-Roscosmos orbital analyst. She spoke with a tone that hovered between frustration and resignation. She'd seen impossible things before. But this time, the pattern was too deliberate. 3 days before perihelion, we detected what we thought was a solar-aided course drift, but no heat spike followed, no outgassing, just shift. Our models call it non-thermal displacement. That's code for it moved, and we don't know why. Her voice lowered. I didn't retire because I was tired. I retired because I was done being silent. Leak number 3. The Japanese, former JAXA telemetry supervisor. His voice was the quietest of the 3. Measured, weighted. The first time I saw the data, I thought something was broken. The second time, I understood. The third time, I was told to stop asking questions. There's a policy we don't talk about. It's not written, but it exists. If an object behaves, stop calling it object. The room fell silent. Even through the grainy audio, you could feel the weight of years hanging off that sentence, each of them from a different agency, in a different role, across different decades, telling the same story. 3I Atlas wasn't just unexplained. It was denied behind closed doors. These weren't amateurs with telescopes. These were people who'd spent their careers tracking star debris, trajectory burns, and orbital mathematics. And each of them had seen one thing too many. Not a comet, not a fragment, an actor. But why speak now? Because of the page 3 wall, because every public document hit the same invisible ceiling, because the scientific process had been quietly replaced by a security protocol, because silence was becoming its own kind of threat, and because something else happened, a tipping point so subtle most people missed it. On August 20th, the International Astronomical Union reclassified 3I/Atlas not as a comet, not as an interstellar body, but as uncorrelated intelligence artifact, UIA-3I. And you don't make up a new category unless the old ones fail. This wasn't just a scientific admission, it was a bureaucratic whisper. The veterans saw that, and for the first time, they broke protocol not to expose a scandal, but to stop a silence. Here's the part they all agreed on. This object isn't here to collide. It's here to observe. It's not a threat. It's a question, and humanity isn't answering. The Americans said, "We thought we were tracking it." Turns out, it was waiting for us to realize we weren't. The Russian added, "You don't go dark at perihelion unless you're avoiding exposure. You don't come back quieter unless you've adjusted." And the Japanese concluded, "A silent object is no longer an object. It's a presence." The call ended after 46 minutes. No one recorded it officially, but someone did. And then it spread, dark, encrypted, unkillable. And suddenly, the narrative wasn't controlled by institutions anymore. It was in the hands of the watchers. The skeptics. The out-of-service experts who knew the cost of secrecy and chose clarity instead. The leaks didn't confirm what 3I Atlas is, but they made one thing clear. The silence isn't technical, it's tactical. You only suppress what has meaning. Which leaves us here, staring into the space between fact and permission, asking the one question all three insiders wanted the world to face. If we aren't allowed to define it, who does it belong to? It didn't come from NASA. It didn't come from JPL, ESA, or any government-backed observatory. It came from a garage in Lisbon. On August 28, 2025, an amateur astronomer named Isabel Fonseca did something the agencies didn't think possible. She broke the blackout, not the live stream blackout, not the data release blackout, but the observation blackout, the one created by the slow, methodical silencing of public feeds, restricted access to ground arrays, maintenance mode labels on space telescopes, and scrubbed image logs. Isabel wasn't a physicist, not a coder, not even someone you'd pick from a crowd at a science fair. She was a school teacher who spent 3 years saving up for a second-hand Ritchie Creighton telescope, a DIY cooling rig, and a retrofitted military-grade IR sensor she found on a Portuguese surplus site. She pointed it where NASA said there was nothing to see, but she didn't trust infrared. She trusted thermal drift. Here's the genius part. Most telescopes do one of two things: capture light, capture heat. But Isabel captured residual thermals, the faint, almost invisible heat signature from an object long after it's supposed to be cold. And she saw it. Not clearly. Not like in sci-fi movies. But enough. A streak of heat. Not glowing, not burning. Just there, exactly where the orbital path of 3I Atlas no longer matched public prediction. That's when she posted her discovery to an anonymous deep sky community. Object is still present, still emitting, drifting off curve, not dead, not debris. She included her raw frames as time-stamped, geotagged, source-calibrated. Within an hour, 4 other amateurs replicated the capture, 1 in Brazil, 1 in Poland, 2 in Japan, 5 separate rigs, different continents. Same invisible trail. 3I Atlas had left the spotlight, but it hadn't left the sky, and here's the most important part. The IR trail did not match its optical trail from 2 weeks before. The object had slowed, not stopped, not fallen, not disintegrated, slowed. That's not orbital mechanics. That's intentional deceleration. The amateur world went critical. Telegram groups, message boards, encrypted channels, hundreds of screenshots, thousands of shared overlays, dozens of voices saying what the agencies wouldn't dare speak aloud. It's not leaving, it's repositioning. For the first time, the entire public-facing discovery process of an interstellar body had bypassed the institutions completely. Not through hacking, not through whistleblowing, but through stubborn curiosity. The movement got a name: Citizen Contact. It wasn't just data anymore. It was collaboration. A distributed sensor net of basement rigs, sky-patched trackers, garage-built IR arrays, and backyard dishes, crowd-logging what space agencies had classified into silence. You can lock telescopes, you can redact papers, you can delete live streams, but you can't unplug a species. Here's what Isabel said in her second post, right before her forum account disappeared. If they won't watch it, we will. If they won't tell us, we'll find out. This object is not alone. And now, neither are we. The agencies scrambled. Emails leaked. Terms like amateur interdiction appeared in scrambled code. A memo circulated internally at ESA. It is no longer possible to restrict observation through central systems alone. Translation: the blackout failed. And in the data Isabel helped unleash, observers noticed something else. The deceleration vector was not random. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't spiraling. It was oriented, pointed at the ecliptic plane, aligned to Earth's orbital band. Not intersecting, but waiting. 3 Atlas didn't fall away. It held position, like an eye, watching, not closing, not blinking, not leaving. The first object from another star didn't just pass through. It took interest. So here we are. Across decades, we sent signals into the void. But the first thing that came to answer didn't send a loud reply. It paused, it slowed, it aligned. And now, the amateurs are the ones telling the world. The object isn't done. It's just watching us back. There's a sentence, short, whispered, easily dismissed, that began circulating in closed astronomy circles just 2 days after Isabel's IR revelation broke the observational blackout. It's not alone. At first, no one took it seriously. These circles always buzz with fringe claims. Faint glints mistaken for satellites, meteors mislabeled as crafts, cosmic rays turned into conspiracies. But this wasn't a glint. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't an error. It was something else entirely. A second object. And unlike 3I Atlas, it didn't come with a bright path, a named telescope survey, or a catalog designation. It came with absence, silence, clarity, and, horrifyingly, precision. Let's rewind. August 31st, 2025. 3 days after the citizen contact movement was born, when amateurs around the world began logging the slowed, off-curve drift of 3I Atlas. One of those amateurs was a man named Kato Nakamura, a satellite hobbyist in Hokkaido with a home-built telescope setup that interfaced with his network of hacked weather satellite feeds. Kato wasn't looking for stars or comets. He was looking for shadows. He specialized in what astronomers call negative space detection. The art of seeing not what's bright, but what blocks the bright. Satellites pass in front of stars. Debris occludes faint fields. Even the ISS creates predictable trails of missing light. But on that night, he saw something that wasn't predictable at all. A patch of missing stars surfaced in the southeastern sky, arc seconds wide, uniformly black. Not a satellite, not debris, not listed in any catalog. And then it moved, not in a straight line, not in orbit, but in a curved, controlled arc, right toward the projected drift of 3I Atlas. Kato posted the frames to a private Discord channel of fellow satellite observers. He attached a timestamp and wrote a single line: "Something is blocking the field, and it's not natural." Most dismissed it. Some scoffed. A few asked for more frames, but one user, a retired image analyst from Lockheed Martin, downloaded the files and processed them. He didn't enhance the light, he enhanced the lack of light. What emerged wasn't a shape, it was a shadow. A perfect ellipse of absence, moving with a velocity inconsistent with anything in Earth orbit, yet too slow to be a meteor, too smooth to be tumbling debris. And over the next hour, 4 other satellite trackers confirmed it, different locations, different rigs. Same blind spot. A hole in the star field, not huge, not bright, but real. And here's where things escalated from anomaly to threat. The new object's trajectory wasn't random, it wasn't tumbling, it wasn't ejecta. It was following the drift path of 3I Atlas, not converging at a collision angle, but matching velocity decay, like a shadow tailing a traveler. The amateurs fell silent. Then, slowly, the fear gave way to resolve. Someone mapped its projected course. Someone else compiled the star field occlusion data. And three terrifying facts emerged. The object was darker than space, invisible in R bands, almost anti-reflective. The object wasn't emitting thermal radiation, unlike 3I Atlas. The object's course wasn't random, it was mirroring, not intercepting, not attacking, not avoiding, shadowing. At the same time, something happened in the classified world. An unmarked memo, later leaked by a whistleblower from a deep space military task force, bore the following warning. Object 2 is non-emissive, non-reflective, and exhibiting synchronized drift. Potential support or retrieval unit. Monitor but do not engage. Support unit, retrieval unit, words that don't belong in astronomy, words that belong in logistics, words that whisper of machinery. And then came the final blow. On September 4th, a new entry appeared in the Minor Planet Center's internal catalog, assigned not a number but a designation code, uncorrelated, Class B/observation flagged, and the tag, linked pattern 3I Atlas, no coordinates, no mass, no press release, just a quiet acknowledgement. A second object is here, and it is here for the first. Here's what we now know. 3I Atlas is slowing. The second object is closing. Both have left natural paths. Neither emits thermal noise. Both exist outside the public definition of interstellar debris, which leaves one chilling possibility. 3I Atlas is not alone because it was never meant to be. Maybe it's not a vessel. Maybe it's a payload, a ma'abasad, a delivery, a courier waiting for pickup. And the second object, the one without light, without heat, that's the hand that collects. Here's the thought that sank into every amateur's mind once the pattern became clear. What if we aren't watching the beginning of contact, but the end of a mission? 3I Atlas moves like a traveler. The second object moves like a ghost. No flash, no roar, no announcement, just two foreign bodies in choreography, drifting in our night, not exploring, not colliding, reuniting. Now ask yourself, what kind of intelligence sends something into deep space, brightly, visibly, and retrieves it in shadow? By the first week of September 2025, the whispers had turned into patterns. The patterns turned into signals. And then finally, the signals turned into something no one dared to call by its real name. A message. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't appear in radio bursts or alien glyphs. It wasn't made for TV or broadcast on every screen. It was quiet, subtle, hidden in a place no agency expected humanity to pay attention to, in the positional drift of 3I Atlas itself. But before we dive into what was decoded, let's rewind to how the message was found. It started with an anonymous collective of amateur astrophysicists and data engineers who gathered in the wake of the Citizen Contact movement. They called themselves the Parallax Group, not because they liked the name, but because it was accurate. They weren't aligned. They weren't united by anything except the belief that something was being hidden from the world, and they had the skills to uncover it. The Parallax Group noticed something no one else did. While the world was watching the shape of 3I Atlas, or the signal bursts, or the second object cloaked in shadow, they noticed the one thing that shouldn't have changed at all: the timing of the object's course correction, the drift intervals. Every course alteration, every micro shift in the trajectory of 3I Atlas happened at precise intervals. And those intervals weren't astronomical, weren't gravitational, and weren't based on the rotation of the object or the position of the sun. They were mathematical. Specifically, they formed a sequence. The distances between course corrections matched the ratios of prime numbers. The intervals weren't just random or mechanical. They were coded. A rhythm made of motion, not noise. This wasn't just an object changing path. It was communicating through movement, encoded in space, stitched into the sky, hidden in plain sight. A message you could only see if you ignored the light and watched the silence between movements. Members of the Parallax Group began to reverse engineer the intervals of the shifts. They plotted each change in trajectory as a node in three-dimensional space, marking the time between each one. When layered into a binary sequence, something extraordinary happened. The movements translated to pulse patterns, and the pulse patterns weren't random. They matched the historic binary encoding scheme used in one very specific context, the 1974 Arecibo message, humanity's first intentional radio message sent into space, broadcast to a star cluster 25,000 light-years away. The correlation wasn't perfect, it wasn't a copy, but it was a mirror, and the interpretation began to appear. Repeating positional shifts equaled ones, lack of motion equaled zeros. The pattern formed a grid. When decoded through this lens, the sequence resolved into something extraordinary, a low-resolution 23 by 23 binary map. A grid just like the one Carl Sagan and Frank Drake used to send the Arecibo message nearly 50 years before. At first, the grid was noise, static, a meaningless smear of dots. But then, someone flipped it, not left-right, not up-down. They inverted the polarity, and the noise became shape. Not a full picture, not a clear diagram, but enough to recognize structure. A symbol, a circle within a circle, a repeating sigil, not of Earth, not of Orion, not of mathematics or human pattern, but something other. At the same time, a member of the group noticed this. Each time the pattern repeated, the timing between shifts shortened by a tiny amount. Not enough to detect with casual observation, but enough to show intent. Like it was waiting. Like it was checking whether we understood, or whether we were even watching. They didn't go public with the discovery. Not yet. They needed corroboration. But they didn't have long to wait. Because 3 days later, someone else found the same pattern. Not in the motion of the object, but in the signal echoes recorded by amateur radio receivers during the post-perihelion silence. The binary showed up again, this time laid out not in space, but in time, and with the two systems cross-referenced, motion and pulse, the last variable dropped into place. Not only was there a message, there was a signature. Someone had been here before. This wasn't first contact, this was second reply. And that's when the Parallax Group posted their encrypted document to a decentralized storage network, a file titled Atlas Code, We Are Not the First Audience. Within hours, the group's online identities disappeared. Their public threads were wiped, their server logs were scrubbed, but the file remained. Copies spread, whispers grew, and buried in the middle of that document, between the graphs and math and plotted orbits, was a line that chilled every person who read it. This was never meant for us. We are decoding the leftovers. Let that settle in your mind. 3i Atlas wasn't trying to say something to Earth. It was replaying something sent long ago, perhaps to someone else. And the message we are only now decoding, it may not even be addressed to us. So here's the question now pulsing between scientists and skywatchers, skeptics and seekers, the faithful and the fearful. If we are reading the reply, then who sent the question? Because if 3i Atlas is not alone, if the second object is not incidental, if the shifts are not random, and if the encoded signal is not meant for us, then we aren't the observers anymore. We are the bystanders. And something is unfolding in our solar system, between senders and receivers who were speaking long before humanity built radios, telescopes, or languages to understand. We weren't supposed to be part of this story. But now we are. There's a moment in every story when the unknown stops being distant, when it steps from abstraction into inevitability. That moment came on September 10, 2025, when a group of independent orbital modelers published a paper that no agency dared to touch, but every watcher had been waiting for. They called it the alignment window. It wasn't the result of a leaked classified model, or a military radar ping, or a whistleblower confession. It came from pure geometry. The paper tracked the drifting path of 3i Atlas and the silent companion object, not as separate entities but as a synchronizing pair. The authors plotted their respective courses using publicly available star maps and amateur data logs. What they found was not two separate vectors. It was convergence, a meeting point in deep space, timed, coordinated, and positioned directly in line with Earth's orbital band. A rendezvous. To anyone who still thought 3i Atlas was a comet, a coincidence, or a cosmic accident, this was the moment everything broke. Because comets don't wait. Fragments don't decelerate, debris doesn't meet its shadow, and rocks don't plan. But 3i Atlas is planning something. Its velocity changes are no longer random nor curious. They have rhythm, timing, a predictive decay curve that brings it closer, not to Earth, but to a point near Earth. Like a delivery set to arrive at the doorstep, but without knocking. The model gave a date, not an impact date, not a collision, a rendezvous. September 29, 2025, 0417 UTC. That's when the two objects, the illuminated traveler and the dark companion, will reach minimum separation and enter a shared drift zone. It won't happen in orbit. It won't be visible from Earth with the naked eye. It won't trigger alarms or launch countermeasures. But it will happen. A silent union between two bodies, one seen, one hidden, in a gravity-neutral corridor between Earth and the Moon. And the worst part? There's a pattern for this. Not in astrophysics. In software. That's what one systems engineer from ESA wrote in an encrypted forum shortly before his account vanished. It's not a rock. It's an executable, running a program in space. There's a kind of design philosophy in network devices. One node transmits loudly, the other responds quietly. One gathers data, the other delivers. Like scouts, like couriers, like code. And if 3i Atlas is broadcasting, and the second object is retrieving, then rendezvous becomes not a meeting, but a merge. Imagine it. One object is a signal, the other is storage. One speaks, one listens, or worse, one collects, one deploys. So what happens at rendezvous point? No one knows, because no one has ever observed a coordinated deep space handoff between two unknown interstellar objects in our system before. It's a first. And maybe, if we don't intervene, a last. But one amateur put it in simpler, more human terms. If something comes into your house and pauses in the hallway and starts waiting and watching, that's not a traveler, that's a process. And yet here's where the story fractures again, not from leaks but from omission. As the countdown approaches, the official channels have closed off all public access to key observation feeds. ESA's Near-Earth Object Monitoring page, redirected to scheduled upgrade. NASA's Sentry Risk Table, quietly delayed for data refactoring. Deep Space Radar, locked behind unannounced access controls. The Virtual Telescope live stream, technical issues, indefinitely. If this were coincidence, it would be sloppy. If it were random, it would be improbable. But this is method, measured. Not just the objects in the sky, the people watching them. Because here's the truth that everyone with a radar dish, a signal lamp, or a telescope pointed at that rendezvous point is now forced to confront. They're not hiding the sky from us. They're hiding us from the sky. There are already rumors now, not of contact, but of preparation. A subset of the Parallax group posted a chilling update just hours before going silent. They're not shielding our eyes, they're shielding the sky from our questions. And here's the part that keeps every honest mind awake. We don't know what happens when the two objects meet. But we do know when, and we do know where. And we do know what has already happened. 3i Atlas, an interstellar arrival, broadcast its presence. The second object, a silent partner, followed in the shadows. And human observation, once open and alive, has now been restricted to whispers and hacks, not because the sky is dangerous, but because the truth might be. So here's the countdown, not from a launch pad, but from a world held out of its own ski at minus 19 days until rendezvous, to minus 19 days until whatever these two things are, decide what to do next, and the question that is started. To burn its way into every encrypted group, every backyard observatory, every defiant amateur channel in the world is this: do we watch the sky, or do we prepare for what's already watching us? It began the same way it ended, with a message no one expected to survive. On September 15, 2025, just 14 days before the predicted rendezvous, the anonymous account originally known as Vector Silence resurfaced, the same account that leaked the first warning, the same voice that vanished into digital smoke after dropping that first unsanctioned truth, the same source whose final line, "It's not noise, it's cadence," haunted every hidden thread and encrypted channel for months. But this time, the message didn't appear on Reddit. It didn't surface in a public forum. It dropped straight into the private network of the Parallax Group. No greeting, no handle, no metadata, just a single audio clip, time-stamped, encrypted, and radiation tagged. What the group didn't anticipate was the format. It wasn't voice, it wasn't text, it was modulation. 1.44 GHz, 7 pulses, then silence, then a final block of sound, a tight, compressed burst of shifted tones, like someone whispering through vacuum, like someone sending a warning through a dying radio in a trench. It took Parallax 4 hours to reconstruct it. 5 more to isolate the carrier and break the tone clusters. And when they did, when they slowed it down and built the wave map that lay beneath the noise, they found a message, not from the objects, not from the skis, from the source now calling itself Vector Silence Bro. Here's the clean transmission, word for word, exactly as decrypted. The two bodies are not independent, they are linked. The first is collector, the second is retrieval. We have seen this before. Not here. Not now. Not for our species. If they rendezvous, protocol activates. That protocol doesn't require us. That is why they are hiding the sky. There is no threat, there is no impact, there is only process. Watch the drift. It's not approaching Earth, it's avoiding us. Just 117 words, spoken in the tone of someone who already knows they won't get another chance to speak again. And then, a short burst at the end. Not words, not code. A phrase burned into silence itself. We are not the audience. And with that, the signal died. No trace. No IP, no follow-up, but the world, the underground world of watchers, trackers, and code breakers, responded like a silent alarm had been triggered. Because the implications of that message shift everything. We have been assuming the objects were approaching us. We have been assuming the objects are here for Earth. We have assumed, like children who believe every sound in the night is a knock at their door, that we are the point. But what if we're not? What if 3i Atlas wasn't meant to be seen? What if its signal wasn't meant to be heard by us? What if the rendezvous isn't a delivery to Earth, but a delivery around it, a handoff through our system, not aimed at us, not seeking us, not warning us, just using us, like a postal route, a checkpoint, a transit point between one star and another, and so the object slows, and so the shadow follows, and so the protocol advances, unbothered by whether or not we understand. That's the part that hit hardest, even among those who wanted to believe. We are not the message, we are the background. If that's true, then our greatest fear isn't invasion, it's irrelevance. What does humanity become when the stars don't even care to threaten us? Because they don't need to. If 3i Atlas is a courier, and the second object is a collector, and rendezvous is just a milestone in a process that predates us, then we're not the story. We are the silence around it. The last known post from the Parallax Group, before their entire network vanished into digital ash, contained a fragment of a reply. If we're not the target, then who was? A simple question, the kind that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. Because the only thing worse than being contacted by something unknown is watching something unknown pass you by. There are moments in history when the world changes not with an explosion, but with an absence. A silence so total, so all-encompassing, that it isn't just heard. It's felt. That moment happened on September 21st, 2025, 8 days before the rendezvous, 6 days after the last known transmission from Vector Silence, 3 days after amateur astronomers around the world confirmed that the deceleration of 3i Atlas was nearly complete and the second object had adjusted its position to match. The day the sky went dark. Not everywhere. Not all at once, not like a blackout or a solar storm, but piece by piece, sector by sector, hemisphere by hemisphere. This was not a failure, it was a shutdown. The first sign was small, a sudden drop-in signal from the Arecibo-class listening facility in Puerto Rico. The system didn't just go quiet. It flipped into what technicians later called silent compliance mode. Then it happened again. In South Africa, in Chile, in Germany, in Australia. Every major deep sky radio dish on Earth, The ones still pointed outward, still tethered to the stars, stopped broadcasting their live feeds. At the same time, amateur astronomers witnessed something more terrifying. The open star tracking platforms, the ones not run by governments, were blocked at the ISP level. Their signal traffic was compressed, throttled, then rerouted, not jammed, silenced. Even the satellite sky feeds, the ones broadcasting deep space infrared backscatter to university servers, were frozen on the exact same frame. A blank patch of night. Right where 3i Atlas and its silent twin should have been visible. If this had been a natural glitch, it wouldn't have stopped at the edge of the sky. But this blackout had boundaries. It didn't affect solar observation. It didn't touch Earth-facing satellites. It didn't cut communication networks or weather scanners or flight radars. It was surgical. The blackout targeted only one region of the heavens, the rendezvous sector. From Earth's perspective, a corridor of space stretching between Leo and Virgo, angled just below the ecliptic, where the drift paths of both objects were set to align. Over half the world's sky was still visible. Stars still twinkled in suburban backyards. Planets still shone in telescopes on rooftops, but the one patch of space humanity was finally desperate to see. That patch was no longer ours. It wasn't just covered, it was taken. And the world felt it. The amateurs screamed first. Tracker feeds died. Thermal scans returned null. Encoded telemetry bounced back with data invalid. The Parallax Group, or what was left of it, sent one final message through an anonymized network relay before their last node blinked offline. They've locked the sky, not to protect us, but to protect the protocol. They attached a dead image. It was a sky grid with a single black square. A void in 4K resolution. Nothingness surrounded by infinity. The caption below it was simple. That is where the handoff will happen. And just like that, the conversation changed. It wasn't about whether the objects were artificial. It wasn't about whether there was a message. It wasn't even about who they were meant for. It became this. What do you do when someone closes your own sky to keep you from seeing what comes next? Some tried to break the block. VPNs, ham radios, multispectral hacks. But the closer they reached for the data, the more it pulled away. It wasn't censorship. It was orchestration. One astrophysicist in Geneva summed it up before she stopped replying altogether. They didn't turn off the ski, they turned off us. Because you can fight an enemy you see, you can debate a signal you hear, but you can't resist a silence that blocks the stars. By midnight UTC, a single fact spread through the underground like a pulse. Earth is not being observed. Earth is being excluded. And yet, there was no panic, no press briefing, no alarms. Not even a rumor in mainstream media. Why? Because the sky didn't go dark for everyone, only for those who were paying attention. And that was the point. If there is a story happening above us, if two foreign objects are completing their rendezvous in the blind spot of humanity, we were never meant to see it. And with the sky gone, the only place left to look was inward. When humanity can no longer look up, it turns inward. Not to retreat, but to wait. And on September 22nd, 2025, that's exactly what the world did. Except the waiting wasn't silent. It was electric. Because even though the sky was locked, the data suppressed, the feeds rerouted, the telescopes muted, there was something the blackout couldn't erase. The pattern. Every calculation, every shadow drift, every fragment of motion data scraped from before the shutdown. They all pointed to the same conclusion. Rendezvous was still coming, and it couldn't be stopped. So while the institutions hid the sky, the independents began to do something they had never done before. They synchronized horizons. Like ancient stargazers tracking omens in the dark, a global network of amateurs and ex-professionals began gathering in the one place no orbital authority could censor. The Earth-facing edge of the sky, the faint halo of space along the horizon line, where low-angle light might catch the silhouettes that the blackout tried to erase. It's not perfect. It's not clear. But it's all we've got. And it began for one simple reason. When the sky becomes forbidden, The horizon becomes a shield. Let me explain. When you look straight up at the sky, you rely entirely on local conditions. You're at the mercy of whatever filters, blockers, or ISP throttles are in place. But when you look at the horizon, when you watch that thin sliver of atmosphere where space meets the edge of the world, you're gathering not one sky but many skies. Light bleeds through. Heat echoes ripple. Objects in low solar angle refraction cast silhouettes invisible overhead, and that's how they found it. On September 23rd, a series of overlapping amateur horizon scans caught what the blackout failed to kill. A glint. Faint, brief, but real. Not from 3i Atlas, not from the shadow object, but from something new. Something neither blocked nor hidden, but not in any prediction model. A surface. A plane. A curved, reflective structure, momentarily lit by solar flare scatter, too large to be debris, too smooth to be rock, too cold to be flare, and positioned exactly where the rendezvous path would intersect Earth's limb at its lowest observable point. A flash, then gone. But not before camera arrays patched together by the parallax remnants and the citizen contact operators caught enough data to estimate one critical detail. Size. This wasn't a courier pod. This wasn't a shadow remora. This wasn't either of the two objects we'd been tracking. It was larger, much larger. Based on atmospheric scatter correction and cloud line comparison, the new object, codenamed Horizon Echo, is estimated to be at least 180 meters in length and not stationary, descending, not toward Earth, but toward the rendezvous waypoint, the same location the now vanished interstellar pair have been gravitating toward, meaning whatever was coming. It wasn't just a handoff, it was a transfer event, something delivered, something retrieved, something received. But here's the part no one expected. Not the amateurs, not the analysts, not even the ones who had already accepted that humanity wasn't alone. The new object is silent. No radio emission, no thermal signature, no drift correction, no pulse, just stillness, just approach, just presence. A presence that had been waiting for something else to arrive first. The Parallax Group, what little remained of them, posted one final summary before their last node was isolated. 3 bodies now, 1 signaler, 1 collector, 1 receiver. And then this line, we are watching a process, not an event. That reframed everything. 3i Atlas wasn't a visitor, the shadow object wasn't a hunter. Horizon Echo isn't a ship. They're components, pieces of an orchestration that does not include us, but is unfolded in plain view of our world. Here's the part that stops the breath in your throat. The horizon flash, that faint glint against a dying sunset sky, was seen by people. Not screens, not sensors, not algorithms, human eyes. And now, whether agencies admit it or not, the world has seen enough to start asking questions no one can suppress anymore. If this is not the beginning of contact, then is it the end of something else? What comes after rendezvous? A departure, an activation, a return? And more urgently, what happens to a species that wasn't part of the process, but saw it anyway? The blackout tried to take away the stars, but the horizon brought them back. Not the sky we wanted, but the sky we were left with, the part they couldn't lock, the edge of the truth, just beyond the reach of denial. And so, on this thin line between world and space, between light and void, between what we know and what we're forced to witness, we wait. Not for them. For the moment we finally understand. We were never meant to look up. But now that we have, we cannot look away. There's a point when silence stops being resistance and becomes an invitation. For months, 3i Atlas had whispered, then gone quiet. For weeks, the shadow object had stalked it, unseen. For days, the sky itself had been locked away, sealed behind firewalls, closed antennas, and erased feeds. But on September 25, 2025, 4 days before the calculated rendezvous, the silence changed. It didn't break because we heard something. It broke because something stopped avoiding us. At 0311 UTC, a signal erupted across amateur spectrum collectors. Not one wavelength, not one band, all of them. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a sweep, an uncompressed broadband activation signal, a clean, unfiltered burst that washed across the globe like a tide of raw data. No message, no code, no syntax, just power. A signal unlike any sent by human machines, neither modulated nor structured, not carrying information in any obvious layer, but carrying presence, the kind that makes no demand, the kind that does not wait for a reply, the kind that says, through sheer force of being, we are done hiding. It lasted exactly 19 seconds, and then nothing. No carrier tone, no lingering pulse, no echo from the ionosphere. But that wasn't the real anomaly. The real anomaly was what happened to the blackout. It ended, instantly, as though the sky itself had just been given permission. Within minutes, the previously dark observational feeds came back online, unannounced, unexcused, and unfiltered. NASA's infrared telescope at Mauna Kea, ESA's deep space cameras in the Canary Islands, the Australian dish arrays that had gone offline for maintenance, all restored, all broadcasting again, and all pointed not at the sun, not at Mars, not at dark energy experiments, but at the rendezvous zone. And what those reopened cameras began to show was no longer a mystery. The objects, all three, were now in visual range. 3I Atlas, stationary, reflective, elongated, cold, silent, drifting, not away but waiting. The shadow companion, barely visible, darker than space. Positioned 90 meters behind 3I Atlas, matching its drift in perfect formation. And then the new arrival, the one amateurs had labeled Horizon Echo, a quiet behemoth, curved alloy surface, matte lattice architecture, size estimate revised, now between 250 to 300 meters, not a rock, not debris, not a remnant, a structure, in motion, with intent. Here's where the record stops sounding like science and starts bleeding into terror. The three objects aligned, not in a straight line, not in a collision path, but in a triangular stasis, an equilateral formation in space, with Earth at its apex beyond them. A stable geometry, not just physical, functional, something alive in the matrix of their configuration. For the first time, humanity was not just watching movement, but operation. One of ESA's live analysts, unaware her mic was unmuted, whispered a line that would be clipped, ripped, and replayed across thousands of hidden channels within an hour. This is choreography. Then came the behavior. No heat signature. No propulsion jet. No visible energy discharge. But the brightness of 3I Atlas began to flicker. Not randomly, in rhythm. The same prime-based interval from the original decoded data patterns. The same mathematical rhythm tied to the binary map. The same cadence vector silence insisted wasn't noise. The difference? The number of pulses. There weren't two this time. There were three. New sequence, new geometry, new behavior. One object signaled. The second object did not react. But the third object, Horizon Echo, began to rotate, slowly, deliberately, not for alignment, not for drift correction, not for navigation, but for exposure. One panel reflected sunlight directly back toward Earth, a mirror function, a flash, a signal, not in radio, not in compression, but in light. A light signature visible from ground-based telescopes in Kenya, Argentina, Indonesia, Utah, all at once. And the first person to comment on it was not a scientist, not an official, not a hidden analyst. It was a backyard telescope owner in Mumbai who posted a single-line message on a now-archived forum. They're showing us they're here, not hiding, not avoiding, no longer waiting, showing. But here's the most important part, the part that made even the hardened believers stop breathing. The panel remained angled toward Earth. Not the sun, not the stars. Us. Then, with no warning, a narrow beam of light shot from the panel into the void. Not at Earth, not at the shadow object, but directly into the empty corner of the triangular formation, as if establishing a fourth point, as if completing a sequence, as if unlocking. That's when we understood. This wasn't just three objects. This was a system, a process that required one messenger, one companion, one executor. And the final trigger? Observation. That's why the blackout ended. That's why the feeds were restored. Because the process required us to see it. The silence was never endurance. It was calibration. And once the system was ready, once the choreography was complete, once the handoff was aligned, the silence broke. Not with a warning, but with a reveal. Just like a door doesn't creak when it opens. But whatever lies beyond it does not stay quiet forever. There are moments in time that feel less like events and more like the breath before a held note. Suspended, weightless, heavy with what's about to come. September 28, 2025, one day before the rendezvous, one day before zero. The world didn't know that name, zero, but those who'd been watching did. The code wasn't meant for headlines. It wasn't meant for press. It wasn't meant for those who stopped looking up. It was meant for the ones who still had their eyes, or their sensors, or their humanity, fixed on the silent geometry gathering just beyond our sky. There were no explosions, no dramas, no whistleblowers leaking blueprints or government ops. It all happened in stillness. And it began, not in a lab, not at a space agency, not in the quiet halls of a disbanded task force. It began in a bedroom in Dakar, where a 16-year-old student named Fatou Diop, using a $300 modified Skycam she'd built from a security lens and a donated CCD board, caught something no one else had bothered to look for anymore. A shadow that didn't belong. Because shadows aren't supposed to appear against space, but this one did. She wasn't even tracking the rendezvous directly. She was monitoring atmospheric scatter off the antipodal horizon, an accidental trick of geometry she'd learned from amateur radio archives. Then she saw it. Not a streak. Not an optical artifact. A shape. A blunt-edged absence passing across a field of stars. And it wasn't one of the three. This was a fourth object. No signal, no thermal bloom, no obvious motion signature, but it didn't drift. It hovered. Then, just as quickly, it vanished again, not away, not out, but behind something that wasn't the sky. Fatou posted her footage in a citizen science Discord, and within 1 hour, the parallax remnants, the sky patchers, what remained of citizen contact, and a handful of silent but very interested lurkers in high-orbit surveillance groups began to sync threads, timestamps, horizon clusters. Their conclusions shook even the most sober among them. The fourth object wasn't a coincidence. The fourth object wasn't a fragment. The fourth object was waiting to be seen, just long enough to be recorded. That's when a new term appeared in the back-channel lexicon, observation lock. The idea was simple, terrifyingly simple. What if this isn't about us watching them? What if this is about them watching us watch them? How many times had something been shown, hidden, then shown again? Not by failure, but by design. As one anonymous analyst put it, it's not that they don't want to be seen, it's that they wanted to be seen now. Because something changes tomorrow. And what changes tomorrow isn't cosmic, it's procedural. One member of the Parallax Group, the last to speak before the network was purged, sent out a final memo through a dead man relay. We thought the rendezvous was an endpoint, but now we think it's a switch. And the switch requires 3 conditions: observer confirmation formation completion, localization signal. He attached an image, a grainy screen capture from an unlisted ESA downlink, 3 dots in a triangle, a 4th dot blinking, and a circle forming around the entire structure. That's when someone said the quiet thing aloud. It's writing a perimeter. Perimeter of what? A broadcast field, an extraction zone, an activation sequence, a shield? No one knew. That night, a ripple of encrypted chatter spread like wildfire across back channels. Message boards, dormant radio nets revived from Cold War bunkers and reconfigured for SkySync. Not a warning, not panic, a request. Document everything, share nothing. Because a truth this big doesn't want to be published. It wants to pull you in. And that brings us to the most unsettling part of the day before zero. No one tried to stop it. Not the agencies, not the militaries, not the crisis frameworks built for asteroid impacts, solar threats, or alien invasion propaganda debunking. Nothing. All anyone did, all the right people did, was watch, and as hours passed, a horrifying idea began to settle in. Maybe this isn't a threat, maybe it never was, maybe what's coming isn't destruction, but completion. Because here's the shift, all three objects, messenger, shadow, receiver, had already arrived. The fourth had now revealed itself, and the pattern was no longer evolving. It was settling, locking, sinking, like the moment, just before a machine finishes its calibration cycle. The sky wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't trying to avoid us. It was waiting. What does a process do when every condition is met? It runs. And that's what tomorrow is, the run. Tomorrow is zero, the merging, the relay, the end of the sequence, or the beginning of something that doesn't need us to understand it, not a broadcast to us, not even a message around us, but something we live inside of, like ants unaware of the construction of a city overhead. And so, midnight passed into morning. The world still didn't know. But the watchers did. And they shared one final line across every quiet, encrypted channel still left alive through back doors and repurposed utilities. Look at the horizon. Don't blink. Zero waits for no one. September 29th, 2025, 0417 UTC. The time given by orbital modelers. The moment whispered through encrypted channels. The point on the calendar the watchers had begun to call only one thing: zero. For those who didn't know, which still meant billions, this was just another night. A quiet stretch of earth rolling beneath the sky, unburdened by curiosity or fear. But for the few who remained watching, zero was a line in time, a boundary. It wasn't about a collision, not an invasion, not even revelation. It was execution. Because for the first time since the arrival of 3I Atlas, the sky stopped changing. It aligned. No drift, no course correction, no shadows or glints, just stillness. The three objects, the bright one, the dark one, the vast curved one known as Horizon Echo, all locked into position as if held in a net none of us could see. And then something happened. No one, not even the most fevered theorist, had been ready for. The formation spun, not chaotically, not randomly, with precision. First in a slow, elegant cascade like a ritual gesture, then faster, pulling the three bodies into a spiral, a controlled gyroscope with the center anchored in the unseen vector where the fourth object had briefly been observed. The photons, the silhouettes, the faint light pulses from 3I Atlas. Everything began to unify, not broadcast, not scatter, focus. Remote telescopes across Malawi, Argentina, Vietnam, and even a secret ground station in a desert near Nevada all recorded it, until they didn't. Because 5 seconds after rotation began, every optical device locked onto the formation experienced the same anomaly: perfect glare, not from sunlight, not from thermal bloom, but from a calculated, concentrated reflection. A burn of light so intense it flooded every frame, drowned every pixel, and wiped the sky into absolute, irretrievable white. Every feed died, every filter failed, every attempt to adapt was met with saturation, and then, just as perfectly, everything went black. Not dark, black, like something had folded over the sky. Not a wave, not a blocking field, but a switch. Split-second diagnostics from those lucky enough to record the blackout before losing their feeds showed the same thing. Signal revoked. Source occluded. It wasn't a failure, it was a shutdown. Even the most defensive minds began to understand. We were no longer invited into the observation. The watchers had become intrusions, and now they were removed from the room. The world didn't panic, because the world didn't know. The blackout wasn't announced on the news. No politician addressed the silence. No agency acknowledged what they'd enabled. Only the watchers spoke. Quietly, calmly, across back doors and radio static. One message passed between them: process complete. But that wasn't the end. It was the bridge, because 4 minutes and 9 seconds after the blackout, every radar system on Earth, civilian, military, skywatch, aviation, registered the same event. Not a departure, not a flash, but absence. 3 objects, then 4, then 0, not moving, not accelerating, not decaying, gone, as if space had reclaimed its pieces or completed a cycle we were never meant to understand. The space where they formed, clean, silent, no trace in thermal, no echo in infrared, no scatter in polarization. The only evidence that anything had ever been there was us, humanity, a civilization briefly watching a system that was never meant for its eyes. And in the hours that followed, across discords, ham radio logs, secret telegram threads, private mirror sites, failed live streams, and cached recovery threads, one final conclusion began to crystallize. It wasn't an arrival. It was a pickup. 3I Atlas wasn't a probe. It was a payload. A courier delivered. The second object wasn't a predator. It was a tracker. The third wasn't contact. It was containment. And the fourth, the silent object that only revealed itself once the watchers had confirmed truth, was the receiver. The end of a route, a handover, or an extraction. Not from us, near us. Inside our solar system, once, now gone. And humanity, still here. Unchanged. Except for one thing. Now we know. We know that something passed through this system, used it, finished its task, and left. Not in rage, not in conquest, not in greeting, but in completion. And so, as the live feeds returned, restored but now meaningless, as the telescopes reactivated, too late, as the amateur arrays struggled to recalibrate, as the horizon fell back into ordinary night, the Parallax Group, in their final archived post before deletion, wrote a single line that became the epitaph for Zero. We were never the target, we were the witness. There was no broadcast to humanity, no signal to decode, no message left in our languages. But the silence that came after wasn't empty. It was a kind of reply, the kind that doesn't speak, the kind that looks back at a species not yet advanced, not yet invited, not yet relevant, and leaves room to wonder, room to fear, room to ask the only question that now matters. If this was the end of something, then what is the beginning? They are gone. Not destroyed, not defeated, not chased away, just gone. And in the silence that followed, something else was born. Not in the sky, not on the radar, but in us. The absence of 3I Atlas and its companions did not bring relief. It brought a void of meaning, a space carved out between what we saw and what it meant. In the Orca logs from that final night, the logs that shouldn't exist, the ones buried on servers NASA never officially connected to, there was a final line left unsanctioned in the encrypted data table. Objects. No longer present a human response. TBD. That wasn't protocol. That was someone breaking it. Because in the hours after Zero, something broke in the minds of those who had kept their eyes on the anomaly long after the rest of the world gave up. The watchers had seen a comet arrive from interstellar space. Then they saw drift, then alignment, then a pattern, then a system, then disappearance. And in that final moment, when the sky went black, not dark but sealed, they saw the worst part. It was never for us. The universe had done something we could not interpret. Something that made no sound, no explosion, no broadcast. Something precise, purposeful, complete. And we were left behind with nothing but questions, and the creeping suspicion that the most terrifying truth isn't that we are alone, but that we're not even relevant. In the following days, as forums went down and mirror threads were scrubbed, the only people still discussing it were the ones who'd seen the raw feeds, the ones who didn't just trust the official logs but lived attached to real-time telemetry like an oxygen line. Amateur network nodes in Chile, private listening stations in Uzbekistan, one forgotten observatory in northern Canada, preserved by the stubbornness of a retired astrophysicist and his granddaughter. They exchanged 3 messages. First, it didn't leave, it closed the interface. Second, we weren't watching a visitor, we were watching a handoff. And last, this wasn't a first contact event, it was an in-system protocol, maybe always happening, just not when we're looking. That third line, the one that refused to comfort, quietly infected every silent corner where thinkers and watchers still gathered. Because if the anomaly was only visible because we caught it off cycle, what else has passed through here, unseen? And what has passed through us? Over the next 12 days, no official channel spoke a word of the event. The blackouts were explained as sensor saturation from solar interference. The disappearance was dismissed with standard boilerplate, natural object trajectories, compound variables. The term atlas was redefined as error-prone dataset, the URLs, vanished into 404s stacked like headstones. But one thing couldn't be erased: the archived sky. Amateurs in Argentina aligned their saved frames side by side with the final ones from Orca, frames that were never supposed to leave government systems, and something impossible emerged: tiny fluctuations. Barely there. Like ripples in a still pond left behind after something leaves the surface. Not debris, not signatures, just the outline of a shift, a footprint, proof that something had been there and had moved on. And that became the first piece of the new hypothesis. They weren't ships. They were transactions. Because maybe the galaxy isn't a battlefield of predators and prey, but a network, a marketplace, a silent, old, efficient system where mass, data, energy, or something stranger moves between stars the way cargo moves between ports. And we, watching from our cradle, just saw our first delivery. That's why no lights were aimed at Earth, why no signals were directed our way, why the objects ignored every broadcast, every ping, every attempt we made to say, "We are here," because we are here. But we are not in play. Not yet. And so the final chapter of this file isn't about aliens, or probes, or conspiracies in the dark. It is about something else: scale, the scale at which we are not the protagonists, the scale at which the sky isn't watching us, the scale at which the universe is full, not of noise, but of structure, invisible not because it hides, but because it is not meant for us. And that perhaps is the most devastating ending of all, that what we mistook for an arrival was really a reminder that the house of the cosmos is not empty. It is occupied, organized, unimpressed by us, and maybe waiting, but not for us to speak, for us to evolve. Until then, we are not locked out. We are just irrelevant. Touchline. Maybe the greatest silence in the universe isn't the absence of communication, but the absence of invitation.